Maya's fingers closed around the billionaire's arm with the grip of a drowning woman, her whispered plea barely audible over the pounding of her heart as her abusive ex-husband's eyes locked onto hers from across the restaurant. 3 minutes later, Marcus Delacroix was on the floor clutching his chest, and Maya realized her desperate gamble to protect herself might have just made her look like a murderer. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes desperation makes us do things we'd never imagine. For Maya Chun, a 28-year-old waitress barely holding her life together, that moment came when she saw him walk through the door. Not the man who would save her, but the man who had spent 3 years destroying her, her ex-husband. And in that split second, with her heart hammering against her ribs and her hands trembling so badly, she nearly dropped the tray of champagne flutes. She made a choice that would change everything. She grabbed the arm of a complete stranger, a man who radiated power and wealth like others radiate heat, and she whispered the most desperate plea of her life. What followed wasn't a fairy tale. It was messier, more complicated, and infinitely more real than any storybook romance. This is the story of how a single impulsive act in an upscale restaurant became the catalyst for justice, redemption, and a love that neither of them saw coming. The Bellevue was the kind of restaurant where Maya Chun felt perpetually out of place, even after 6 months of working there. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of golden light over tables draped in cream linens. The silverware alone probably cost more than her entire month's rent. The clientele moved through the space with the easy confidence of people who had never worried about a bill in their lives. Their laughter soft and cultured, their conversations peppered with references to vacation homes and investment portfolios. Maya had learned to make herself invisible here, to be the perfect shadow that appeared with water and wine and disappeared just as quickly. It was a skill she'd perfected out of necessity. Being noticed meant risking questions. Questions meant risking the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her past. It was a Thursday evening, the restaurant humming with its usual refined energy. Maya had just finished serving the appetizer course to a table of executives celebrating a merger when she felt it. That prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the one that meant someone was watching her. She turned slowly, her practiced smile already in place, and her entire world tilted on its axis. There, being seated at a corner table by the Mater D, was Marcus Delacroix, her ex-husband, the man she'd fled from 3 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a restraining order she'd been terrified to enforce. The man who had promised to love her and instead had systematically isolated her from her friends, controlled every dollar she earned, and made her feel like she was losing her mind with his gaslighting and manipulation. He looked exactly the same, handsome in that polished, predatory way, his dark hair swept back, his suit impeccably tailored, but it was his eyes that made her blood run cold, those pale gray eyes that could shift from charming to cruel in a heartbeat, and they were fixed directly on her, a slow smile spreading across his face like poison seeping through water. Maya's hands went numb. The tray she was holding suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She'd been so careful. She'd changed her phone number, moved to a different neighborhood, even used her mother's maiden name on her employment application. She'd thought she was safe. She'd thought he'd moved on. The restraining order had expired a year ago, and she'd foolishly allowed herself to believe he'd forgotten about her. How wrong she'd been. Marcus raised his hand in a small wave, and the gesture was so casual, so familiar, it made her want to scream. He was sitting with another couple, a beautiful blonde woman in a designer dress and an older gentleman who looked like money incarnate. Marcus leaned over and said something to them, and all three turned to look at her. The blonde woman's expression was coolly assessing. The older man looked bored, but Marcus's smile never wavered. He was enjoying this, enjoying her fear. Maya forced her legs to move, carrying her tray back toward the kitchen on autopilot. Her manager, Jean-Pierre, a severe Frenchman who ran the floor with military precision, intercepted her near the bar. "Table 12 needs their wine service," he said, his accent thick with disapproval at her delay. "Now, Maya, table 12. She glanced at the seating chart on the hostess stand as she passed. Table 12 was occupied by a single diner, a man who had arrived 20 minutes ago and ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu without even looking at the price. A man who, according to the whispers from the other servers, was Alexander Grayson, the CEO of Grayson Industries, one of the largest tech companies on the West Coast. A man who was, quite possibly, her only way out of this nightmare, because Marcus was watching her. She could feel his eyes tracking her every movement, and she knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't just let this go. He'd follow her after her shift. He'd corner her in the parking lot or show up at her apartment. The restraining order was expired, and even when it had been active, it had been nothing more than a piece of paper. Marcus had always been skilled at operating just within the boundaries of the law, and making her life hell without quite crossing the line into prosecutable territory. Her mind raced as she retrieved the wine from the cellar. A 2015 Chateau Margaux that cost more than she made in 2 weeks. She had to do something. She couldn't just serve her tables and pretend everything was normal while Marcus sat there, watching her, planning whatever sick game he was about to play. She needed protection. She needed a barrier. She needed someone Marcus would be forced to respect. Alexander Grayson sat alone at table 12, his attention focused on his phone. Up close, he was even more striking than she'd realized. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, all sharp angles and strong jaw, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temple. He wore his wealth and power like a second skin, comfortable and absolute. He was probably 40, maybe 42, and he had the look of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He was perfect. Maya's hands were shaking so badly as she approached his table that she nearly dropped the wine bottle. She set it down carefully on the white tablecloth and began the ritual of presenting the label, but her eyes kept darting back to Marcus's table. He was watching her with that same terrible smile, and as their eyes met, he raised his own wine glass in a mock toast. The gesture was so full of malicious promise that Maya felt her stomach turn. She couldn't do this. She couldn't just stand here and wait for whatever he was planning. She had to act. She had to do something insane, something desperate, something that would make Marcus back off. "Sir," she said, her voice coming out higher and thinner than she intended. Alexander Grayson looked up from his phone, his expression one of polite disinterest. She could see him cataloging her in that split second, assessing and dismissing her as just another part of the restaurant's service machinery. "I need to ask you something," she continued, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Something very important." His eyebrows rose slightly, the first flicker of actual interest crossing his face. "The wine is fine," he said, his voice a deep baritone that matched his commanding presence. "Don't need to ask permission to pour it." "It's not what I mean," Maya said. And then, before she could lose her nerve, before rational thought could stop her, she did it. She reached out and took his arm, her fingers wrapping around the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. She leaned in close, so close she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that probably cost more than her car. She could see the exact moment surprise registered in his dark eyes, the slight widening, the sharp intake of breath. "Please," she whispered, and she heard the desperation in her own voice, raw and real and completely undisguised. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to act like we're together. Like we're a couple. Just for a few minutes, please." For a long, terrible moment, he just stared at her. She could see him processing what she'd said, see the confusion and suspicion warring in his expression. She had just grabbed a billionaire CEO and asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend. It was insane. It was beyond inappropriate. It could get her fired and probably arrested. But then she saw his gaze shift, moving past her shoulder to something behind her, and she knew without looking that he was seeing Marcus, that he was seeing the man who was watching this interaction with growing fury, the forced smile finally slipping from his face. When Alexander Grayson's eyes came back to hers, something in them had changed. The cold assessment was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like understanding. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Because my ex-husband is sitting at that table over there," Maya said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "And he's a very bad man. And if he thinks I'm alone, if he thinks I'm unprotected, he's going to make my life a living hell. But if he thinks I'm with someone like you, someone powerful, someone he can't push around, maybe he'll leave me alone." She watched his face, trying to read his reaction, terrified that he was about to pull away, call the manager, have her thrown out onto the street. Instead, Alexander Grayson did something that shocked her to her core. He smiled. It wasn't the polite, distant smile of a wealthy man being served by the help. It was something warmer, more genuine, and surprisingly kind. "Then I suppose," he said, reaching up to cover her hand with his own still resting on his arm, "we'd better make this convincing." Before Maya could process what was happening, he stood up, his movements smooth and deliberate. He was tall, easily 6'2", and his presence seemed to fill the space around them. He turned her gently, keeping her hand tucked against his arm, and positioned them so that they were facing Marcus's table directly. The effect was immediate and electric. Marcus's face, which had been settling into that familiar mask of controlled anger, went completely white. The blonde woman beside him said something, but Marcus didn't respond. He was frozen, staring at Maya and the man beside her, and for the first time in 3 years, Maya saw something in her ex-husband's expression that she'd never seen before. Fear. Alexander Grayson's hand was warm over hers, steady and solid, and when he spoke, his voice carried just far enough to be heard at the nearby tables. "Darling," he said, and the endearment sent a shiver down her spine. "I thought you were going to wait until your shift was over to say hello." His free hand came up to her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch, and suddenly the image they were presenting was crystal clear. They looked like lovers, like a powerful man who had come to this restaurant specifically to see his girlfriend, like a couple who had every right to touch each other with such casual intimacy. Maya's brain short-circuited. This was working. This was actually working. She could see Marcus's hands clenching on the table, see the rigid set of his shoulders, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't getting up. He wasn't doing anything except staring at them with barely concealed rage. And then Alexander Grayson did something that sealed the performance completely. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft and brief, but unmistakably proprietary. "I couldn't wait," Maya heard herself say, and she was shocked at how steady her voice sounded. "I missed you." From the corner of her eye, she saw Marcus suddenly push back from his table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Coop." The blonde woman reached for his arm, saying something sharp and questioning, but he shook her off. He was standing now, staring at them across the restaurant, and his face was a thundercloud. Every eye in the dining room was turning toward the commotion, the refined atmosphere crackling with sudden tension. And then, just as Marcus took a single step toward them, his body went rigid. His face, already pale, turned a sickening shade of gray. His hand flew to his chest, clutching at his shirt, and his mouth opened in a soundless gasp. The blonde woman screamed. The older gentleman leaped up, reaching for Marcus as he swayed dangerously. "Oh my God," someone shouted. "Call an ambulance, he's having a heart attack." And Maya, still standing in the protective circle of Alexander Grayson's arms, watched as her ex-husband collapsed onto the pristine floor of the Bellevue, his pale eyes rolling back in his head, the restaurant erupting into chaos around them. The world seemed to move in slow motion and at lightning speed simultaneously. Servers rushed forward, their professional composure shattered. Jean-Pierre was barking orders in rapid French, his phone already pressed to his ear, calling for emergency services. The blonde woman who had been sitting with Marcus was on her knees beside him, her designer dress pooling on the floor, her perfectly made-up face twisted in panic. The older gentleman had loosened Marcus's tie and was checking for a pulse, his movements efficient and practiced. And Maya stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what she was seeing. Part of her, the part that had loved Marcus once upon a time before she understood what he really was, wanted to rush forward to help. But the larger part, the part that still bore the invisible scars of his control and cruelty, felt nothing but a terrible, guilty sense of relief. Alexander Grayson's hand tightened on her arm, grounding her. His voice, when it came, was low and calm in her ear, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. "Breathe," he said simply. "Just breathe." She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. She inhaled shakily, her lungs burning, and the world snapped back into focus. The paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. They swarmed around Marcus with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, administering oxygen, loading him onto a stretcher. The blonde woman was crying now, mascara streaking down her face as she clutched Marcus's hand. She was saying something about his heart condition, about how he'd been under so much stress, about how the doctors had warned him. Maya felt Alexander's gaze on her, assessing. She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see judgment or disgust, or at the very least confusion about why she wasn't rushing to her ex-husband's side. Instead, she saw only a calm, measured intelligence. "We should sit down," he said quietly, sure in shock. "I'm fine," Maya said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt her knees begin to buckle. Alexander caught her smoothly, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight as if she weighed nothing at all. He guided her to his table, pulling out a chair and settling her into it with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. He poured water from the crystal carafe into a glass and placed it in her hands. "Drink," he ordered. And there was something about the authority in his voice that made her obey without thinking. The cold water helped, cutting through the fog in her brain. She watched as the paramedics wheeled Marcus out through the restaurant's main entrance, the blonde woman following close behind, still crying. The older gentleman paused at the door, his eyes scanning the room until they found Maya. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before following the others out into the night. The restaurant was in chaos. Jean-Pierre was attempting to restore order, offering free desserts and champagne to mollify the disturbed diners. But the carefully cultivated atmosphere of refined elegance had been shattered. Several tables were settling their bills early, clearly uncomfortable with the evening's dramatic turn. Maya knew she should get back to work, should help manage the crisis, but she couldn't seem to make her body move. She just sat there, staring at the spot where Marcus had fallen, her mind replaying the moment over and over. His face going gray, his hand clutching his chest, the terrible gurgling sound he'd made as he hit the floor. "Miss Chun," Jean-Pierre's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. Maya looked up to find her manager standing beside the table, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed irritation. "Are you able to continue working, or do you need to leave?" She opened her mouth to respond, but Alexander Grayson spoke first. "She's leaving," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "With me." Jean-Pierre's eyebrows shot up, his gaze moving between them with sudden understanding. "Of course, Mr. Grayson," he said, his irritation evaporating instantly, replaced by obsequious deference. "Please, take all the time you need, Miss Chun. Your section will be covered." The shift in Jean-Pierre's attitude would have been comical under different circumstances. Apparently, being claimed by a billionaire CEO granted instant immunity from the restaurant's strict policies. Alexander stood, reaching into his jacket and extracting a slim leather wallet. He pulled out what looked like a black credit card and handed it to Jean-Pierre. "For the inconvenience," he said simply, "and close out my bill along with whatever Miss Chun's ex-husband's table ordered. The entire thing." Jean-Pierre took the card with a small bow, his eyes gleaming. Alexander then turned to Maya, extending his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you out of here." Maya looked at his hand, at the strong fingers and the expensive watch gleaming at his wrist, and felt a surge of vertigo. She didn't know this man. She'd grabbed his arm in a moment of pure panic, and he'd inexplicably played along, but that didn't mean she should trust him. That didn't mean she should leave with him. And yet, what choice did she have? She couldn't stay here, not with the other servers staring at her. not with the memory of Marcus's collapse still fresh and raw. She took Alexander's hand and let him pull her to her feet. He kept his hand on the small of her back as he guided her through the restaurant, and she was grateful for the support because her legs still felt like they might give out at any moment. They walked out into the cool night air and Maya inhaled deeply, trying to clear her head. The parking lot was still full of emergency vehicles, their lights painting the darkness in flashes of red and blue. An ambulance was pulling away, sirens wailing, and Maya knew Marcus was inside it, fighting for his life. She should feel something, shouldn't she? Concern, fear, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, she just felt numb. Alexander's car was a sleek black Mercedes, the kind that probably cost more than Maya would earn in 5 years. He opened the passenger door for her and she slid into the soft leather seat without protest. He walked around to the driver's side with economical grace and settled behind the wheel. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unasked questions and the weight of what had just happened. "I need to take you somewhere," Alexander said finally, starting the engine. His voice was matter-of-fact, businessman dealing with a problem. "Somewhere you can sit down properly, maybe eat something. You're gonna crash hard when the adrenaline wears off." "I should go home," Maya said weakly. "Where's home?" he asked, and something in his tone made it clear he already knew she didn't want to go there. Not if there was any chance Marcus had found out where she lived. Not if there was any chance the blonde woman or the older gentleman might come looking for answers. Maya closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her in waves. "I don't know," she admitted. "Anywhere but there." Alexander nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable response and pulled out of the parking lot. They drove in silence through the city streets, the lights blurring past the windows. Maya should have been terrified, should have been questioning the wisdom of getting into a car with a stranger, but somehow she wasn't. There was something about Alexander Grayson, something solid and trustworthy that made her feel safer than she had in years. They pulled up in front of a high-rise building in the financial district, all glass and steel and intimidating height. Alexander handed his keys to a valet who appeared as if by magic and guided Maya through revolving doors into a lobby that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Marble floors, modern art on the walls, a concierge desk staffed by impeccably dressed attendants. One of them nodded at Alexander as they passed. "Good evening, Mr. Grayson," the man said smoothly. "Good evening, Marcus," Alexander replied, and Maya felt a jolt at the name. Not her Marcus, she reminded herself. Just a coincidence. They took a private elevator, Alexander swiping a keycard to activate it, and rode up in silence. Maya watched the numbers climb. 20 floors, 30, 40. They finally stopped at the 45th floor, and the doors opened directly into an apartment. No. Not an apartment, a penthouse. The space was enormous, all open concept with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city lights spread out below like a carpet of stars. The decor was minimalist but clearly expensive, all clean lines and quality materials. "This is where you live," Maya said, and it wasn't really a question. Alexander shrugged off his jacket and draped it over the back of a leather sofa. "This is one of the places I live," he corrected. He walked to the kitchen, which was separated from the living area only by a massive marble island, and opened the refrigerator. "When was the last time you ate?" Maya tried to remember. Lunch had been a protein bar scarfed down during her break. Breakfast had been coffee. "This morning," she said vaguely. Alexander made a disapproving sound and began pulling items from the refrigerator. Within minutes, he'd assembled a plate of cheese, crackers, grapes, and sliced vegetables. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget and brought everything over to the coffee table. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the sofa. "Eat. You're going into shock and you need food in your system." Maya sat more because her legs gave out than because she was following orders and picked up a piece of cheese. She bit into it mechanically, barely tasting it, but Alexander was right. The moment food hit her stomach, she realized she was ravenous. She ate steadily, working her way through the plate while Alexander sat in the armchair across from her, sipping his wine and watching her with those dark, intelligent eyes. When she'd eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger, she set down her wine glass and met his gaze directly. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You had no reason to play along with what I asked. You could have called security and had me thrown out. Why did you do it?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "When you grabbed my arm," he said slowly, "I was annoyed. I thought you were going to try to flirt with me, maybe angle for a bigger tip or slip me your number. It happens more often than you'd think. Then I saw your face. I saw real fear, real desperation. And when I looked at the man you were talking about, when I saw the way he was watching you, I recognized something." Maya's throat tightened. "What did you recognize?" "The look of a predator," Alexander said flatly. "I've seen it before in boardrooms and negotiations. Men who view other people as possessions, as things to control and manipulate. I saw it in his eyes, and I saw what he'd done to you reflected in yours. So I helped, because not helping would have made me complicit in whatever he was planning to do to you." The honesty of the answer took her breath away. She'd expected platitudes or maybe some line about being a good Samaritan. Instead, he'd given her the truth, blunt and unvarnished. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I mean it. Thank you." "You're welcome," Alexander replied. "Now I think it's time you told me the whole story. Who is Marcus Delacroix? And what did he do to you?" Maya felt her chest tighten, the familiar panic rising. She never talked about Marcus, about what their marriage had been. It was too painful, too shameful. But as she looked at Alexander Grayson, at this strange man who had helped her without hesitation, she found herself wanting to tell him, needing to tell him, so she did. She started at the beginning with the whirlwind romance, the charming man who had swept her off her feet when she was 23 and naive. She told him about the slow, insidious way Marcus had isolated her from her friend, how he'd convinced her to quit her job so she could focus on being a good wife. She described the financial control, how Marcus had given her an allowance like she was a child, how he'd monitored every purchase and questioned every expenditure. She talked about the gaslighting, the way Marcus would move her things and then accuse her of being forgetful, the way he'd tell her she was crazy when she questioned his increasingly erratic behavior, and finally she told him about the night she'd left. The night Marcus had cornered her in their bedroom, his hand around her throat, his eyes cold and empty, telling her that if she ever tried to leave him, he would make sure she regretted it for the rest of her short life. She'd waited until he left for work the next morning, packed a single suitcase, and walked out of the house they'd shared. She'd filed for divorce and gotten a restraining order, then disappeared as completely as she could manage. For 3 years, she'd been looking over her shoulder, waiting for him to find her, and tonight, he finally had. When she finished talking, her voice was hoarse and there were tears streaming down her face that she hadn't even realized she was crying. Alexander sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but his hands were clenched so tightly on the arms of his chair that his knuckles were white. The silence that followed Maya's confession was profound, broken only by the quiet hum of the city beyond the windows. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, suddenly embarrassed by her emotional outburst. She'd just unloaded 3 years of trauma onto a complete stranger, a powerful man who probably dealt with corporate espionage and billion-dollar deals, not the messy reality of domestic abuse and restraining orders. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick. "You didn't ask for all of that. I shouldn't have dumped it on you." Alexander's eyes, which had been fixed on some point beyond her shoulders, snapped back to her face. "Don't apologize," he said, and there was an edge to his voice that made her straighten. "Not for that. Never for that." He stood abruptly and walked to the windows, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. For a long moment he just stood there, staring out at the glittering cityscape. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost contemplative. "My sister was married to a man like Marcus." Maya's breath caught. Alexander continued without turning around. "James was everything you'd want on paper. Harvard educated, came from old money, charming as hell when he wanted to be. My family loved him. I loved him. He was my friend before he ever dated Rebecca." The past tense wasn't lost on Maya. "What happened?" she asked softly. Alexander's shoulders tensed. "What always happens with men like that?" He isolated her slowly, so gradually that none of us noticed until it was too late. By the time Rebecca tried to leave him, she was a shell of who she'd been. No friends, no money of her own, and so beaten down emotionally that she believed she deserved what he did. He turned to face Maya, and there was something raw and painful in his expression. She left him 3 times. Each time he'd find her, convince her he'd changed, promise her the world, and each time it got worse. The 3rd time she left, she didn't tell anyone where she was going, not even me. She just vanished. Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but these weren't for herself. They were for this unknown woman, for Alexander's sister, for every woman who had ever felt trapped by a man who claimed to love them. "Did she get away?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. Alexander nodded slowly. "She did. It took her 4 years, but she rebuilt her life, changed her name, moved across the country, started over from nothing. She's safe now, happy even. She has a new partner, someone who treats her the way she deserved. But those 4 years cost her everything. Her career, her confidence, years of her life spent looking over her shoulder, and James never faced any real consequences. His family's lawyers made sure of that. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. So when I saw you tonight, when I saw that fear in your eyes and recognized what you were running from, I think I just acted because I couldn't help Rebecca when she needed it most, but I could help you." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest in a way that Maya hadn't expected from a man like Alexander Grayson. She understood now why he'd helped her, why he'd played along with her desperate charade without hesitation. It wasn't charity or pity. It was personal. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Alexander returned to his chair, picking up his wine glass but not drinking from it. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, shifting into a more business-like tone. "Your ex-husband collapsed tonight, but assuming he survives, and his heart condition isn't immediately life-threatening, he's going to come looking for answers. He's going to want to know who I am, what you are to me, whether the relationship is real." Maya felt panic rising in her chest again. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I dragged you into something that's going to be complicated and messy, and you don't deserve that. Shh, I'll figure something out. I'll tell him it was fake, that I paid you to help me or something." Alexander shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "That would put you right back where you started, vulnerable and alone. Men like Marcus, men like my former brother-in-law, they prey on isolation. The only reason he backed off tonight before he collapsed was because he thought you had someone powerful protecting you. If we admit it was an act, you lose that protection." Maya's mind was racing. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we make it real," Alexander said calmly, as if he were proposing a business merger rather than something that would fundamentally alter both their lives, or at least real enough that Marcus believes it. "You move in here. We're seen together in public. We present a united front. He'll do his research. He'll find out who I am, what resources I have at my disposal, and he'll think twice about coming after." The suggestion was so outrageous that Maya laughed a slightly hysterical sound. You want me to move in with you? You don't even know me. We met 2 hours ago. I know you're a survivor, Alexander said. I know you're brave enough to leave an abusive marriage and start over with nothing. I know you work hard because no one serves tables at the Bellevue without being excellent at their job. And I know that right now you need help, whether you want to admit it or not. Maya wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could handle this on her own, but the truth was she couldn't. She'd been barely holding it together before Marcus showed up, working double shifts to pay for the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford, jumping at shadows, never quite able to relax. The idea of having someone in her corner, someone with the kind of power and resources that Alexander Grayson wielded, was almost too tempting to resist. But what do you get out of this? She asked suspiciously. Nothing in life is free. You're helping me, but what's in it for you? Alexander considered the question, swirling the wine in his glass. Honestly, peace of mind. The knowledge that I'm not standing by while someone gets hurt when I have the power to stop it. And maybe, he added with a slight smile, some good PR. Alexander Grayson in a serious relationship might make certain business rivals think twice about their approach. It was a calculated answer, the response of a man who thought 10 steps ahead in every situation. But Maya saw something else in his eyes, something that looked like genuine concern. This is insane, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew she was going to agree. We don't know each other. We're from completely different worlds. This could blow up in both our faces. It could, Alexander agreed. Or it could save your life. Which risk are you willing to take? When he put it like that, the choice was obvious. Maya took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and met his gaze direct. Okay, she said. We'll do it your way. But I need you to understand something. I'm not a charity case, and I'm not going to be a kept woman. If I'm living here, I'm contributing. I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll find another job. I'll pay my way somehow. Alexander's smile widened, and for the first time that evening it reached his eyes. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said. Now let's establish some ground rules. They talked for another hour, hammering out the details of their arrangement. Maya would move into one of the penthouse's guest rooms. They would maintain separate lives but present a united front in public. Alexander would have his security team do a thorough background check on Marcus, find out everything they could about his current situation, his finance associate. If Marcus tried to contact Maya, she would inform Alexander immediately. There would be no secrets between them, at least not about anything that could put either of them at risk. It was a business arrangement, clinical and clear-cut, and yet there was something deeper running beneath it. An understanding, a mutual respect that went beyond the practicalities of their situation. When they finally finished talking, it was nearly 2 in the morning. Alexander showed her to the guest room, a space that was larger than her entire apartment, with its own bathroom and a bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. There are clothes in the closet, he said, gesturing to a walk-in that was bigger than most people's bedrooms. Previous guests have left things behind. Find something comfortable to sleep in and we'll get your belongings from your apartment tomorrow. Maya nodded, too exhausted to do anything but agree. She waited until Alexander left, closing the door behind him with a soft click, before she allowed herself to fully process everything that had happened. Just this morning, she'd woken up in her cramped studio, worried about making rent and wondering if she'd get decent tips. Now she was standing in a billionaire's penthouse. Having entered into a fake relationship designed to protect her from her abusive ex-husband, her life had become something out of a movie, except movies never showed how terrifying the uncertainty was, how much her hands were still shaking even now. She walked into the bathroom and caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, her hair falling out of the neat bun she'd styled for work. She looked wrecked, which was appropriate because that's exactly how she felt. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to ground herself in something real and tangible. In the closet, she found an array of designer clothes, most still with tags attached. She selected the simplest thing she could find, a soft cotton t-shirt that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, and changed out of her work uniform. The shirt hung to her mid-thigh, and she'd never felt anything so comfortable in her life. She crawled into the massive bed, sinking into sheets that felt like silk, and stared up at the ceiling. Sleep should have been impossible given everything that had happened, but exhaustion pulled at her like a tide. Her last thought before she drifted off was of Alexander Grayson's face when he'd told her about his sister. The pain there, the regret, the determination to not let history repeat itself. She'd stumbled into the protection of a man who understood exactly what she was running from, because he'd watched someone he loved barely survive it. Maybe, just maybe, she'd be okay. Across the penthouse in his own bedroom, Alexander stood at the window with his phone pressed to his ear. The person on the other end answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Talk to me," Alexander said without preamble. The voice that responded was crisp and efficient, belonging to Marcus Webb, his head of security. Not the same Marcus, thankfully, just another unfortunate coincidence. "I've got preliminary information on Marcus Delacroix," Webb said. "He's a hedge fund manager, upper middle tier, makes good money, but not spectacular. No criminal record, but there are some interesting flags. 3 previous employees filed complaints about hostile work environment, 2 of them women who alleged harassment. All complaints were settled quietly with NDAs. Alexander's jaw tightened. What else? He's currently engaged to Vanessa Whitmore, daughter of Senator Whitmore. That's who was with him tonight. They're supposed to get married in 3 months. The engagement was announced 6 months ago with quite a bit of fanfare given her father's position. So he's moved on," Alexander mused, or appears to have. Appears being the key word, Webb confirmed. "I'm digging deeper, checking his financials, his communications. looking for any indication that he's been searching for his ex-wife. I should have more for you by tomorrow afternoon. Good, Alexander said. And Webb, I want round-the-clock security on this building. Discreet but thorough. If Marcus Delacroix or anyone associated with him comes within 100 yards, I want to know about it. Understood, Webb said. Anything else? Alexander thought about Maya sleeping in his guest room, about the fear he'd seen in her eyes, about his sister Rebecca, who still sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares about James. Yes, he said quietly. I want everything we can legally access on his medical history. He had a heart attack tonight, and I want to know if this is his first one or if there's a pattern. Because if there's a pattern, if his health is deteriorating, that changes things. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You think he might not survive this? Webb said. It wasn't a question. I think we need to be prepared for all possibilities, Alexander replied. Call me as soon as you have anything substantive. He hung up and set the phone on his nightstand, but he didn't move toward the bed. Instead, he continued to stand at the window, watching the city lights, thinking about the strange turn his evening had taken. He'd gone to the Bellevue for a quiet dinner alone, a rare break from his relentless schedule. Instead, he'd been pulled into a situation that was complicated, potentially dangerous, and absolutely not something he had time for given the merger negotiations currently demanding his attention, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. There was something about Maya Chun that had gotten under his skin. Something beyond the obvious parallels to Rebecca's situation. When she'd grabbed his arm and whispered that desperate plea, when he'd looked into her eyes and seen raw, authentic fear, something in him had shifted. He'd spent the last decade building walls around himself, keeping people at arm's length, viewing every interaction through the lens of business utility. It was safer that way, cleaner. But Maya had shattered that distance without even trying. She was real in a way that most people in his world weren't, unpolished and honest and completely without pretense. It was refreshing and terrifying in equal measure. Alexander finally moved away from the window and climbed into bed, but sleep was elusive. His mind kept returning to the moment when Marcus Delacroix had collapsed, to the strange timing of it all. The man had been enraged, that much was clear. But was rage enough to trigger a heart attack in an otherwise healthy man? Or was there something else going on? Something his security team would uncover in their investigation. Morning came too quickly, announced by sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that Alexander had forgotten to cover. He checked his phone and found 3 missed calls from his assistant, 2 from his lawyer, and a text from Webb saying they needed to talk. He called Webb first. Tell me, Alexander said, skipping any pleasantries. Marcus Delacroix is in stable condition at Mercy General, Webb reported. He had a myocardial infarction, a legitimate heart attack caused by a blocked artery. They performed an emergency angioplasty last night and inserted a stent. He'll make a full recovery, but he's going to be in the hospital for at least 3 to 5 days, possibly longer. So he's alive, Alexander said, unsure whether he felt relief or concern at this news. Very much alive, Webb confirmed. And according to my source at the hospital, he's already making demands and causing problems for the staff. His fiancée has been by his side all night, as has Senator Whitmore himself. This is becoming a higher profile situation than we initially anticipated. Alexander processed this information, already thinking several moves ahead. The senator's involvement complicated things. Whitmore was a powerful man with deep connections and a reputation for protecting his family's interests at any cost. If Marcus painted himself as the victim in this scenario, as the wronged party who'd been shocked into a heart attack by seeing his ex-wife with another man, he could potentially leverage Whitmore's influence to make things very difficult. What about his history with Maya? Alexander asked. Have you found anything we can use? Webb was silent for a moment. That's where it gets interesting, he said slowly. The divorce records are sealed, which isn't unusual, but the level of security around them is. Someone with significant resources has made sure those files are buried deep. I've got people working on it, but it's going to take time. The restraining order, however, that I was able to access, it was filed 3 years ago and lists multiple incidents of threatening behavior, financial control, and 1 instance of physical assault. There are photographs attached to the file, medical records from an emergency room visit. Alexander felt his hands clench involuntarily. Send me everything, he said. I want to see what we're dealing with. Consider it done, Webb replied, but there's something else you should know. Marcus Delacroix has already had 2 visitors this morning who aren't family. 2 men, both registered as business associates, but their backgrounds suggest they're private investigators. Whatever story's being constructed about last night, it's happening fast and with professional help. They're building a case, Alexander realized, trying to figure out who I am, what my relationship with Maya is, looking for any angle they can exploit. Exactly, Webb confirmed, which is why I'd recommend you get ahead of this. Control the narrative before someone else does. Alexander thanked Webb and ended the call, his mind already formulating a plan. He showered and dressed quickly, opting for casual clothes rather than his usual business attire. When he emerged from his bedroom, he found Maya already awake, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee clutched in both hands. She was wearing the same t-shirt from last night, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked young and vulnerable and absolutely exhausted. She turned when she heard him approach, and he saw dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd slept about as well as he had. Morning, she said quietly. I hope it's okay that I made coffee. I couldn't figure out how to work your machines, like something from a spaceship, so I just pushed buttons until something happened. Alexander couldn't help but smile. The coffee machine is admittedly more complicated than necessary, he said, moving to pour himself a cup. But you seem to have managed. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the windows, the city waking up 45 floors below them. Everything looked different in the daylight. Less dramatic, more real. The events of last night felt almost like a fever dream, except Maya was standing in his kitchen, proof that it had all actually happened. I need to tell you something, Alexander said finally. Marcus survived the night. It's going to be fine. He watched Maya's face carefully as he delivered the news, trying to gauge her reaction. He saw relief flash across her features first, followed quickly by fear, and then something that looked almost like resignation. Of course he did, she said softly. Men like Marcus always survive. They're like cockroaches. Alexander wanted to argue with her cynicism, but he couldn't. Men like Marcus, like James, like all the other predators who wore expensive suits and charming smiles, they did seem to have an uncanny ability to land on their feet no matter what happened. There's more, he said gently. He's already had private investigators visit him this morning. They're going to be looking into us, into our relationship, trying to find inconsistencies or lies they can exploit. Maya set down her coffee cup with a shaky hand. So it's starting already, the games, the manipulation. This is what he does, Alex. He twists everything until you don't know what's real anymore. Then we make sure our story is airtight, Alexander said firmly. We make it so believable that no amount of investigation can poke holes in it. Starting today, we become a real couple in every way that matters publicly. Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. What does that mean exactly? It means we're seen together, Alexander explained. We go out to breakfast this morning, somewhere visible where we'll be photographed. We're affectionate but not over the top. We look like a couple who's been together for a while, comfortable with each other. Then we go to your apartment and pack up your things, move you in here properly. We create a digital trail, social media posts, that sort of thing. Maya laughed, a bitter sound. I don't have social media, she said. I deleted all my accounts when I left Marcus. He used them to track me, to see who I was talking to, where I was going. It was easier to just disappear completely. That actually works in our favor, Alexander said. It explains why there are no photos of us together before now. You were keeping a low profile, staying off the grid, and I respected your privacy. We can say we've been dating for 6 months, but kept it quiet because of my public profile and your desire for anonymity. 6 months, Maya repeated, testing the words. That's specific. Specific is believable, Alexander said. Vague timelines invite suspicion. We need details, shared memories, inside jokes. We need to know each other well enough that when someone asks questions, our answers line up. This is insane, Maya said, but there was no heat in her words. Just exhaustion and acceptance. I feel like I'm living in some kind of thriller novel. Welcome to damage control, Alexander said with a slight smile. This is what I do, Maya. I manage crises, control narratives, turn potential disasters into strategic advantages. Think of this as a very personal merger negotiation. Maya studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Why are you so good at this, she asked. Not the business part, I get that, but the rest of it, the way you're handling this whole situation like it's just another problem to solve. Most people would have run screaming by now. Alexander considered the question, wondering how honest to be. Most of my life has been about control, he said finally. When you grow up the way I did, with money and power and everyone wanting something from you, you learn quickly that emotions are weaknesses other people will exploit. So you compartmentalize. You turn everything into a strategy, a transaction. It's not healthy, he admitted, but it's effective. And right now you need effective more than you need healthy. Maya's expression softened slightly. What about what you need, she asked. Everyone keeps asking what I need, what I want, how I feel, but you're the one who got dragged into this mess. What do you need, Alexander? The question caught him off guard. No one ever asked him that. They asked what he wanted in business deals, what his position was on board decisions, what returns he expected on investments, but no one asked what he needed on a personal level. He'd trained them not to by keeping everyone at such a distance that personal questions felt inappropriate. Right now, he said slowly, I need to make sure you're safe. Everything else is secondary. It was the truth, even if it wasn't the complete truth. He didn't mention the sleepless nights thinking about Rebecca, the guilt that still gnawed at him for not seeing the signs earlier, for not being able to protect her when she needed it most. He didn't mention the strange sense of purpose he felt having Maya here. The way helping her felt like a chance at redemption for all the ways he'd failed his sister. Some truths were too complicated to voice, especially to someone he barely knew. They spent the next hour hammering out more details of their cover story, creating a relationship history that would hold up under scrutiny. They'd met at a charity gala 8 months ago, Alexander decided. Maya had been working the event as part of the catering staff, and they'd struck up a conversation during a quiet moment. He'd been charmed by her honesty and intelligence, so different from the usual social climbers at such events. They'd exchanged numbers, started seeing each other casually, and eventually it had become serious. Maya contributed her own details, small touches that made the story more believable. She'd been hesitant at first because of their different social positions, worried that people would think she was a gold digger. That's why they'd kept it quiet, avoiding public appearances until they were sure about each other. By the time they'd finished, they had a story that was detailed enough to be convincing, but simple enough to remember. "Now we practice," Alexander said. He stood and extended his hand to her. "Come here." Maya approached cautiously, and when she was close enough, Alexander took her hand, pulling her gently toward him. She stiffened instinctively, and he felt her resistance, the ingrained wariness of someone who'd been hurt by touch too many times. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "but if we're going to sell this, we need to be comfortable with basic physical contact, holding hands, standing close, casual touches, nothing inappropriate, just what any couple would do naturally." Maya took a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay," she said. "Show me." Alexander placed one hand lightly on her waist, keeping his touch gentle and non-threatening. His other hand still held hers. "Like this," he said. "We're standing together, having a conversation. To anyone watching, we look like we belong to each other." She was tense as a coiled spring, every muscle tight with anxiety. He could feel her trembling slightly, fighting between her logical mind that knew he wasn't Marcus and her body's instinctive fear response. "Look at me," he said softly. She raised her eyes to his, and he saw the fear there, but also determination. "I know this is hard," Alexander continued. "I know every instinct you have is screaming at you to run, but I promise you, I will never use your trust against you. This is an arrangement, a partnership. You have all the power here to say no, to set boundaries, to walk away if you need to." Maya's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the manipulation she'd learned to recognize. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because slowly, incrementally, he felt her begin to relax. Her shoulders dropped slightly, her breathing evened out, and the trembling stopped. "That's better," he said encouragingly. "See, we can do this." They practiced for another 20 minutes until Maya could stand beside him, hold his hand, and lean into him slightly without looking like she was being held hostage. It wasn't perfect, but it was convincing enough. The real test would come when they ventured out into the world, when she had to maintain the illusion under pressure. But Alexander was confident she could do it. She'd survived Marcus Delacroix. She could survive anything. Finally, he stepped back, releasing her. "Ready for breakfast?" he asked. "We have a relationship to debut." Maya squared her shoulders, calling up that same fierce determination he'd seen last night when she'd grabbed his arm and changed both their lives. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said. "Let's give them a show they'll never forget." The restaurant Alexander chose for breakfast was called Lumiere, a French bistro in the heart of the financial district that catered to the city's elite. It was the kind of place where deals were made over croissants and coffee, where senators breakfasted with CEOs, and where every table had a clear view of every other table, perfect for being scene. Maya had changed into clothes from the guest room closet, a simple but elegant navy dress that fit her surprisingly well and probably cost more than her monthly rent. She'd pulled her hair back in a sleek ponytail and applied minimal makeup, trying to look like someone who belonged on Alexander Grayson's arm. The result was striking. She looked polished and sophisticated, but there was still something soft and genuine about her that no amount of designer clothing could change. Alexander's Mercedes pulled up to the valet stand, and immediately Maya felt eyes turning toward them. The valet recognized Alexander instantly, greeting him by name with the kind of deference reserved for regular customers who tipped well. Alexander came around to her side of the car and opened her door, extending his hand to help her out. It was such a simple gesture, but Maya felt the weight of it, the performance beginning in earnest. She took his hand and stepped out onto the sidewalk, and Alexander immediately drew her close, his hand settling naturally at the small of her back. To anyone watching, they looked like exactly what they were pretending to be: a wealthy man and his girlfriend arriving for a leisurely breakfast. Inside, the maître d' greeted them warmly and led them to a table by the window, prime real estate for being photographed. Maya was hyper-aware of every eye in the restaurant tracking their progress, every conversation that paused as they passed, every head that turned to get a better look. It felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Alexander pulled out her chair, another small gallant gesture, and she sat down with what she hoped was natural grace. He took the seat across from her, and almost immediately a server appeared with menus and water. Alexander ordered coffee for both of them without asking, and Maya was grateful. Her mind was too busy scanning the room, looking for threats to make decisions about beverages. She recognized several faces from the news, business leaders and politicians, all of whom seemed to recognize Alexander in turn. "So this is your world," Maya said quietly, leaning forward slightly so her voice wouldn't carry. Alexander followed her lead, creating an intimate bubble of conversation in the middle of the crowded restaurant. "This is one version of it," he confirmed. "The performance version, where everything is calculated and everyone is watching everyone else. It's exhausting, but it's necessary. How do you stand it? Being on display all the time, never being able to just exist without someone analyzing your every move." "You get used to it," Alexander said said with a slight shrug. Or you learn to use it to your advantage. Right now, for instance, every person in this restaurant is going to remember seeing us together. They're going to remember how we looked at each other, how comfortable we seemed. By this afternoon, the gossip networks will be buzzing with speculation about who you are and what you mean to me. And by tomorrow, when Marcus's investigators start asking questions, they'll find a dozen witnesses who can confirm we're a real couple. It was brilliant and manipulative and exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made Alexander Grayson a billionaire before he was 40. Maya should have been uncomfortable with the calculated nature of it, but instead she felt oddly safe. This was a game Alexander knew how to play, and for the first time in 3 years, she had someone on her team who was better at the game than Marcus. Their coffee arrived, and with it a basket of pastries that looked too beautiful to eat. Alexander selected a croissant and placed it on her plate, a gesture that was both thoughtful and possessive in equal measure. "Eat," he said gently. "You need your strength for what comes next." "What comes next?" Maya asked, breaking off a piece of the croissant. "After breakfast, we go to your apartment and collect your things," Alexander said. "Then we make some strategic stops, places where we're likely to be photographed. The art museum, maybe a walk through the park. We build a day's worth of evidence that we're a couple who enjoy spending time together." Maya felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "My apartment," she said slowly. "Marcus knows where I live, or at least he knew where I used to live before last night. I moved 3 times in the first year after I left him, trying to stay ahead of him. The place I'm in now, I've been there for about 14 months. I thought I was safe." Alexander's expression darkened. "He found you anyway, which means he's been watching longer than just last night. He's been tracking you, waiting for the right moment to make contact." The thought made Maya's skin crawl. How long had Marcus known where she lived? How many times had he driven past her building, watching her come and go, planning his approach? The violation of it was almost worse than the physical confrontation she'd been dreading. "We'll have security with us," Alexander said, reading the fear on her face. "My people will do a sweep of your apartment before we enter. Make sure there are no surprises waiting, and we'll be quick. In and out in 30 minutes. Maya nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we can do that." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Maya found herself studying Alexander when he wasn't looking directly at her. In the morning light, he looked less intimidating than he had last night, though no less powerful. There were fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor would indicate, and she noticed he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. He was handsome in that classic, almost austere way that made him look like he belonged in old money portraits. But there was something else too, something warmer underneath the polished exterior. She wondered what he was like when he wasn't performing, when he was alone and didn't have to maintain the armor of control he wore so naturally. As if sensing her scrutiny, Alexander looked up and caught her staring. She expected him to call her out on it, but instead, he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, keeping his voice low and intimate. "I'm thinking that you're very good at this," Maya said honestly. "The performance. If I didn't know better, I'd believe you actually cared about me." The smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. "Who says it's entirely performance?" he said quietly. "Just because this arrangement started out of necessity doesn't mean everything about it has to be false. I do care, Maya. Maybe not in the traditional romantic sense, not yet, but I care about your safety, your well-being. That part is real." The confession caught her off guard, and she felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. It had been so long since someone had genuinely cared about her without expecting something in return, without trying to control or manipulate her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You've saved my life, Alexander." He reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture appearing natural and affectionate to anyone watching, but Maya felt the squeeze of reassurance in his grip. "We're saving each other," he corrected. "You just don't know it yet." Before Maya could ask what he meant by that, their moment was interrupted by a smooth, cultured voice. "Alexander Grayson, as I live and breathe, actually taking time for breakfast. I thought you survived entirely on coffee and spite." Maya looked up to see a tall, elegant woman in her 50s approaching their table, dressed in a power suit that screamed wealth and influence. She had silver hair cut in a sharp bob and intelligent eyes that were currently fixed on Maya with undisguised curiosity. Alexander stood politely, and Maya noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his easy expression became more guarded. "Senator Whitmore," he said, and Maya felt her blood run cold. Senator Whitmore, as in Senator James Whitmore, Marcus's future father-in-law. What were the odds that they would run into her on their very first public outing? "Don't be so formal," the senator said with a laugh, though her eyes remained calculating. "We've known each other long enough that you can call me Patricia." She turned her attention fully to Maya, and the weight of that gaze was considerable. "And you must be the mystery woman I've been hearing whispers about all morning. How delightful." Alexander's hand found the small of Maya's back again, a protective gesture. "Patricia, allow me to introduce Maya Chun," he said smoothly. "Maya, this is Senator Patricia Whitmore." Maya forced herself to stand and extend her hand, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Pleased to meet you, Senator," she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The senator shook her hand firmly, her grip strong and assessing. "The pleasure is mine," she said. "It's not often Alexander here breaks his rule about keeping his personal life completely separate from everything else. You must be special indeed." Maya felt Alexander's hand press slightly more firmly against her back, a silent message of support. "She is," he said simply, and there was something in his tone that suggested the conversation was over, but the senator wasn't finished. "I do hope we'll be seeing more of you, dear," she said to Maya, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Perhaps at the wedding next month. My daughter Vanessa is getting married and we're having quite the celebration. I'm sure Alexander's mentioned it. He received an invitation weeks ago." The mention of Vanessa, of Marcus's fiancée, was clearly deliberate. The senator was fishing, trying to gauge Maya's reaction to see if she knew about the connection. Maya felt trapped, unsure how to respond without revealing too much or appearing suspicious. "We'd be honored to attend," Alexander said before Maya could formulate a response, "which would give us a chance to meet your soon-to-be son-in-law. I understand he had a medical emergency last night. I hope he's recovering well." The senator's eyes sharpened. "You heard about that," she said carefully. "How news travels in this city," Alexander replied with practiced ease. "Is he going to be all right?" "He'll be fine," the senator said, but there was something cold in her expression now, something that made Maya think of a predator sizing up prey. "A minor heart attack, stress-induced," the doctor said. "He's been working too hard, pushing himself too much, but he's young and strong. He'll bounce back. I'm sure seeing Vanessa has been good medicine." She paused meaningfully. "Though I understand the attack happened at the Bellevue while he was having dinner." Such a shock for poor Vanessa. "Were you there by any chance, Alexander?" The question was casual, but the intent behind it was clear. The senator knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious, enough to start connecting dots. Maya's heart hammered in her chest, but Alexander remained perfectly calm. "We were," he said easily. "In fact, Maya was working that evening. We'd planned to meet after her shift, but given the circumstances, I collected her early. Quite a scene. I hope your future son-in-law makes a full recovery." The senator's smile became glacial. "How coincidental," she said, "and how fortunate for Maya that she had you there to support her during such a distressing event." The subtext was clear. The senator suspected something, and she was letting them know she was watching. This breakfast that was supposed to establish their relationship as legitimate had just become infinitely more complicated. They'd been caught in the senator's web, and Maya had no idea how they were going to get out of it. Alexander, however, seemed unfazed. "Patricia," he said warmly, as if they'd been discussing nothing more concerning than the weather, "we really must be going. We have a full day planned. But please give Vanessa and her fiancé my best wishes for a speedy recovery. I look forward to celebrating with them at the wedding." He guided Maya away from the table before the senator could respond, leaving cash on their own table to cover the bill and a generous tip. They walked out of the restaurant with measured calm, but the moment they were in the car with the doors closed, Maya let out a shaky breath. "She knows," Maya said, her voice tight with panic. "The senator knows something happened. She's going to tell Marcus. She's going to help him come after us." Alexander started the engine, his expression thoughtful rather than worried. "She suspects," he corrected, "but suspicion isn't proof. And more importantly, we just established something crucial. We confirmed we were at the restaurant together, that our relationship predates last night. We gave her a narrative that's consistent and believable." "But she's the senator," Maya protested. "She has resources, connections. If she decides to make this her business, Alexander, we're in trouble." Alexander pulled out into traffic with practiced ease, navigating the morning rush with the confidence of someone who always knew exactly where he was going. "Then we make sure she has bigger problems to worry about than us," he said calmly. "Senator Whitmore is a political animal. Everything she does is calculated based on risk versus reward. Right now, we're a curiosity, maybe a minor annoyance. But if Marcus's health continues to be an issue, if the wedding gets delayed or her focus will shift to damage control for her daughter's reputation and her own political capital. We just need to make sure we're not worth her attention." Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in his strategic thinking, but fear had sunk its claws deep into her chest and wouldn't let go. "You didn't see the way she looked at me," Maya said quietly, "like I was something she needed to eliminate. Like I was a threat to everything she'd built." Alexander glanced at her and his expression softened slightly. "I saw exactly how she looked at you," he said. "And yes, she sees you as a potential problem. But Maya, she doesn't know the full story. She doesn't know what Marcus did to you, doesn't know about the abuse or the restraining order. All she knows is that her daughter's fiancé had a heart attack after seeing his ex-wife with a powerful man. Right now, you're a mystery, and people fear mysteries. Once we give her a boring, believable explanation, she'll lose interest." The certainty in his voice was almost enough to convince her. Almost. They drove in silence for a while, the city passing by outside the windows in a blur of glass and steel and hurrying people. Maya found herself studying Alexander's profile again, trying to understand this man who had so completely upended her life in the span of 12 hours. He was an enigma. This billionaire CEO who played corporate games with ruthless efficiency, but who had dropped everything to help a desperate waitress. She wondered what drove him, what ghosts haunted him besides his sister's experience. Everyone had damage. She'd learned that much from her own therapy sessions after leaving Marcus. The question was how people carried that damage, whether they let it define them or whether they used it to become something better. Alexander Grayson seemed like someone who had transformed his damage into armor, but Maya suspected that armor had cracks in it, places where the real person underneath could still feel pain. They arrived at Maya's apartment building 20 minutes later. a nondescript four-story structure in a neighborhood that could generously be called transitional. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business because everyone had something they didn't want scrutinized too closely. Maya had chosen it specifically because it was anonymous, forgettable, the kind of building you could walk past 100 times without really seeing. A black SUV was already parked in front, and as Alexander pulled up behind it, two men in dark suits emerged. "Security," Alexander explained, seeing Maya's nervous look. "They're going to check your apartment first, make sure everything is secure." The men approached, and Alexander rolled down his window. "Status?" he asked the taller of the two. Webb had briefed them earlier. "All quiet, sir," the man reported. "We've been here for 30 minutes. No suspicious activity, no one entering or leaving the building who doesn't belong." "Good," Alexander said. "Let's move." Maya led them inside, her hands shaking slightly as she unlocked the outer door. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking. It's the familiar scent of home mixing with her anxiety to create a nauseating combination. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as they climbed the stairs, she became acutely aware of how shabby everything must look to Alexander and his security team. Peeling paint on the walls, a flickering fluorescent light on the 2nd floor landing, the faint sound of a crying baby filtering through thin walls. This was her reality, the life she'd built from nothing, and suddenly she felt ashamed of it in a way she never had before. Alexander must have sensed her discomfort because he moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said quietly, just for her ears. "There's no shame in surviving." The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her, loosening the knot of embarrassment that had been tightening in her chest. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped back to let the security team enter first. They moved through her tiny studio with professional efficiency, checking the closet, the bathroom, even looking under the bed and behind the shower curtain. After a few minutes, they declared it clear and stepped back into the hallway to give them privacy. Alexander entered behind Maya, and she tried to see her home through his eyes. It was small, barely 300 square feet, with a kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge. A bathroom so tiny you could touch all 4 walls without stretching. And a main room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room all at once. Her furniture was secondhand, mismatched pieces she'd found at thrift stores or on the curb on trash day, but it was clean, organized, and unmistakably hers. Books lined makeshift shelves made from cinder blocks and planks. Plants crowded the windowsill reaching for sunlight, and photographs she'd taken herself decorated the walls. Cheap frames, but the images inside them were good, capturing moments of beauty in unexpected places. A sunrise reflected in a puddle, an old woman feeding pigeons in the park, a child's abandoned toy on a bench. Alexander walked slowly around the small space, taking it all in, and Maya braced herself for judgment or pity. Instead, when he turned back to her, there was something like respect in his eyes. "You did this," he said. "Built this life from scratch with nothing. That takes courage." Maya felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes. "It's not much," she said. "Compared to what you have, it's nothing. It's everything," Alexander corrected gently. "It's freedom, independence, safety. Those things are priceless, regardless of square footage or zip code." Before Maya could respond, one of the security team members appeared in the doorway. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight. They followed him to the window, and the man pointed down to the street. There, parked across from Alexander's Mercedes, was a dark blue sedan with tinted windows. Maya's blood ran cold. She knew that car. She'd seen it before, parked on her street at odd hours, always in different spots but always within view of her building. She'd convinced herself it was paranoia, that she was seeing threats where none existed. But now, with everything that had happened, she knew the truth. "It's been following her, hasn't it?" Alexander said. "It wasn't a question." The security guard nodded. "We ran the plates. The vehicle is registered to a private investigation firm that has Senator Whitmore's chief of staff listed as a regular client. They've been surveilling this location for at least 2 weeks. Possibly longer. 2 weeks. Marcus had known where she was for at least 2 weeks, probably longer. And he'd been watching, waiting, planning. The violation of it made Maya feel physically ill. She sank down onto her bed, her legs unable to support her weight anymore. "He's been watching," she whispered. "All this time I thought I was safe, but he's been watching." Alexander's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Not anymore," he said. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "I want every detail on that vehicle and everyone associated with it," he said without preamble. "And I want to know every place it's been, every location it's surveilled. If they've been watching Maya, I want to know what else they've been watching." He listened for a moment, then added, "And I want our own people on. If they're going to surveil us, they're going to know they're being watched right back. Let's see how they like the pressure." He hung up and turned to Maya, his voice gentler. "Pack what you need," he said. "Clothes, personal items, anything that matters to you. We're not leaving anything here they can use against you." Maya wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but she wasn't fine. She was terrified and angry and so tired of being afraid, so she just nodded and began pulling clothes from her tiny closet, stuffing them into the battered suitcase she'd used to flee Marcus 3 years ago. As she packed, Alexander moved around the small apartment, and she realized he was documenting everything with his phone. Photographs of her space, close-ups of the window with the sedan visible in the street below, even shots of the building's inadequate security. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Building our case," he replied. "If this goes legal, if Marcus or the senator tries to paint you as unstable or opportunistic, we'll have evidence of the surveillance, proof that you were being stalked and had legitimate reason to seek protection. Everything we do from this point forward needs to be documented and defendable." It was a sobering reminder that this wasn't just about escaping Marcus. This was about building a fortress around herself that was strong enough to withstand whatever attacks were coming, and they were coming. Maya could feel it like a storm building on the horizon, pressure building, darkness gathering. Marcus had found her, and he had powerful allies now. The confrontation she'd been dreading for 3 years was finally here. Within 20 minutes, Maya had packed everything that mattered to her. It all fit in one suitcase and 2 boxes. A sobering reminder of how little she'd accumulated in 3 years of freedom. The security team carried everything down to the SUV while Alexander did one final sweep of the apartment. He paused at her small shelf of books, pulling one out and examining. "The Gift of Fear." He read the title aloud, by Gavin de Becker. "This is good. You've been educating yourself." Maya joined him by the shelf. "After I left Marcus, I read everything I could about abuse, manipulation, gaslighting. I needed to understand what had happened to me, why I didn't see the signs earlier. That book probably saved my life. It taught me to trust my instincts, to recognize when something felt wrong even if I couldn't articulate why." Alexander nodded slowly, replacing the book. "Your instincts were right," he said. "Everything you felt, all the fear and paranoia you thought might be in your head, it was all real. He was hunting you. But the difference now is that you're not alone. You have me. More importantly, you have resources. We're going to turn the tables on him, Maya. He's used to being the predator. It's time he learned what it feels like to be prey." The words should have sounded melodramatic, but coming from Alexander, they sounded like a promise, a declaration of war. They left the apartment building together, and as they walked to the car, Maya glanced back at the blue sedan. The windows remained tinted, giving nothing away, but she knew someone was inside watching them, recording them, reporting back to Marcus or the senator or whoever was pulling the strings. Let them watch, she thought with sudden, fierce determination. Let them see that she wasn't alone anymore, wasn't the frightened, isolated woman Marcus had tried to destroy. She had an ally now, and not just any ally. She had Alexander Grayson, a man who understood power and how to wield it, who had his own reasons for wanting to see men like Marcus brought down. As they drove away, Maya watched the sedan in the side mirror. It didn't follow them, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had. They were confident enough in their surveillance that they didn't need to tail them. They already knew where Maya was going. To Alexander's penthouse, to safety, or to what they hoped was safety. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. They stopped at a boutique where Alexander insisted on buying Maya proper clothes, not because what she had wasn't good enough, he assured her, but because she needed armor for the world they were about to navigate together. She tried on dresses and suits while Alexander worked on his phone, occasionally looking up to give a nod of approval or suggest a different color. The staff treated her like royalty because she was with him, and Maya felt the strange dissonance of being simultaneously herself and someone playing a role. By the time they returned to the penthouse, it was late afternoon. Maya's new clothes had been delivered and hung in the guest room closet, her boxes unpacked by a housekeeper who had materialized and disappeared without Maya even realizing she was there. The efficiency of Alexander's world was staggering. The way problems were solved before you even articulated them. The way money and power smoothed every rough edge. It would be easy to get used to this, Maya thought. Dangerously easy. And that scared her almost as much as Marcus did, because she'd learned the hard way that comfort could be a cage if you weren't careful. Alexander found her standing in the guest room, staring at her transformed space. His phone buzzed and he checked it, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Maya asked, her stomach dropping. "We have a problem," he said slowly. "Marcus checked himself out of the hospital this afternoon against medical advice, and according to my sources, his first stop after leaving wasn't home to rest. She didn't need him to finish. She knew. He came here," she said. "He knows where I am." Alexander nodded, his jaw tight. "He's in the lobby right now, demanding to see you. Building security has him contained, but he's threatening to call the police, claiming you're being held against your will." The walls were closing in, the safety Maya had felt for the last 24 hours evaporating like morning mist. Marcus was here, demanding access to her, and he had the law potentially on his side if they didn't handle this perfectly. "What do we do?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "We do what we should have done from the beginning," Alexander said, his eyes meeting hers with fierce determination. "We go down there together, we face him together, and we make it absolutely clear that you're exactly where you want to be. And Maya," he added, his voice softening slightly, "I need you to trust me. What comes next is going to be difficult, but I promise you, I won't let him hurt you again." Maya looked at this man who had become her unexpected champion, her shield against a nightmare she thought would never end. She thought about the last 3 years of running and hiding, of living in fear, of letting Marcus steal her peace even in his absence. She thought about the woman she used to be before him, strong and confident and unafraid, and she made a choice. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Let's end this. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt both infinite and instantaneous. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. Alexander stood beside her, solid and calm, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. She could feel the tension in him, though, coiled and ready. A predator preparing for confrontation. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and Maya's breath caught in her throat. The lobby of Alexander's building was all marble and glass, modern and coldly beautiful. Security guards stood at strategic positions, their posture alert but professional. And there, in the center of it all, like a cancer spreading through healthy tissue, was Marcus Delacroix. He looked terrible. His face was still gray, his skin clammy with sweat despite the building's perfect climate control. He wore a hospital bracelet on his wrist, and his clothes, the same suit from the restaurant, were rumpled and stained, but his eyes, those cold, pale gray eyes, were exactly as Maya remembered them, calculated, furious, utterly convinced of his own righteousness. When he saw Maya step out of the elevator with Alexander, his entire body went rigid. For a moment, no one moved. The tableau was frozen, a breath held before the storm broke. Then Marcus smiled, and it was the smile Maya remembered from her worst nights, the one that promised pain disguised as love. "Maya," he said, his voice carrying across the lobby with practiced warmth. "Thank God. I've been so worried about you." He took a step forward, but two security guards immediately moved to intercept him, forming a human wall between Marcus and the elevator. Marcus held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his expression shifting to wounded confusion. "I don't understand," he said, looking around at the guards, at the concerned concierge, playing to an audience. "I just want to talk to my wife." "Ex-wife," Maya said, and she was surprised by how strong her voice sounded. "We've been divorced for 3 years, Marcus. You know that." Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "A technicality," he said dismissively. "Maya, whatever this man has told you, whatever he's promised you, it's not real. You're confused, you're scared. I saw you at the restaurant, and I know it was a shock for both of us. But running off with a stranger isn't the answer. Come home with me. We can work this out." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a heartbeat Maya felt herself wavering. This is what Marcus did, how he operated. He made you doubt your own reality, made you question what you knew to be true. But then Alexander moved, stepping slightly in front of her, and his voice when he spoke was ice over steel. "Miss Chun is not confused, and she's certainly not your wife. She's my girlfriend, and she's exactly where she wants to be. I suggest you leave before this becomes a legal matter." Marcus's attention snapped to Alexander, and the mask of concern slipped for just a moment, revealing the rage beneath. "And who are you exactly?" he demanded. "Some billionaire she's latched onto? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Maya is unstable. She makes up stories, creates dramas. I've been trying to help her for years, trying to get her the psychiatric care she needs, but she keeps running." Alexander's expression didn't change, but Maya felt the temperature in the lobby drop several degrees. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Alexander said quietly. "A man who spent years abusing his wife, controlling every aspect of her life, and who threatened to kill her when she finally found the courage to leave. A man who has been illegally surveilling her apartment for weeks, stalking her, waiting for an opportunity to reassert control. Would you like me to continue? Because I have documentation of all of it." The color that had been slowly returning to Marcus's face drained away completely. His eyes darted around the lobby, calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this. "That's ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost its confident timbre. "I've been concerned about her well-being. Keeping an eye on someone isn't stalking. And as for abuse, that's a lie Maya tells to justify abandoning her marriage. Ask anyone who knew us. We were happy. I loved her." The past tense wasn't lost on anyone. Love, not love, because this wasn't about love and never had been. This was about possession, about a man who couldn't accept that something he considered his property had walked away. Maya felt anger rising in her chest, hot and clean and clarifying. She stepped out from behind Alexander, meeting Marcus's gaze directly for the first time. "You didn't love me," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You owned me. There's a difference, and I'm not confused or unstable or making up stories. I have medical records from the emergency room visit after you choked me. I have photographs of the bruises. I have the restraining order that documented your threats. And I have 3 years of freedom that taught me exactly what I escaped from." Marcus's face twisted into something ugly. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Maya saw several security guards tense, ready to intervene if he made any aggressive move. "You ungrateful little bitch," he hissed, all pretense of concern evaporating. "I gave you everything. A home, a life, a purpose. You were nothing when I met you, just some waitress with delusions of being special. I made you into something, and this is how you repay me? By humiliating me, by ruining my life?" There it was, the real Marcus, finally revealed. Not the charming man who had swept her off her feet, not the concerned ex-husband worried about her well-being. This was the monster she'd lived with, the one who saw her as an object that had malfunctioned, a possession that had dared to have its own will. Alexander moved then, positioning himself fully between Maya and Marcus. His voice when he spoke was deadly quiet. "You need to leave, now. If you ever contact Maya again, if you come within 500 feet of her, if you so much as think about her, I will destroy you. I will use every resource at my disposal to make sure the world knows exactly what you are. Do you understand me?" Marcus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think you scare me? You think your money means anything? My fiancée is Senator Whitmore's daughter. I have connections you can't even imagine. You're making a very big mistake. Alexander smiled, and it was the coldest expression Maya had ever seen. No, he said softly. You've made the mistake. You see, I've already had my legal team file for a new restraining order on Maya's behalf. The hearing is scheduled for next week, and unlike your previous visits, this time it won't be sealed. Every detail of what you did to her will be public record. Every threat, every act of control, every bruise you left on her body, all of it. And then my PR team is going to make sure that every news outlet in the city knows about it. Senator Whitmore's future son-in-law revealed as a domesticator. Think about what that will do to her political career. Think about what it will do to your wedding. Marcus's face had gone from gray to white to a mottled purple. Veins stood out on his neck and his breathing was coming fast and shallow. You can't, he said, but the words lacked conviction. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Alexander said. The threat hung in the air between them, real and solid. Maya watched Marcus process it, watched him realize that for the first time in his life, he'd come up against someone he couldn't manipulate or intimidate or control. Someone with more power, more resources, and absolutely no hesitation about using them. For a long moment, Marcus stood there, swaying slightly on his feet, his face a mask of impotent rage. Then his hand flew to his chest, clutching at his shirt. His breathing became labored, his eyes wide. He stumbled, nearly falling, and one of the security guards rushed forward to catch him. He's having another episode, the guard called out. Someone call an ambulance. But Maya saw it, the quick, calculating look Marcus shot in her direction, the way his fingers weren't quite pressing hard enough to indicate real distress. He was faking it, or at least exaggerating, using his heart condition as a weapon, a way to paint himself as the victim to make them look like the aggressors. It was so perfectly Marcus that Maya almost laughed. Alexander saw it too. She could tell by the way his expression didn't change, by the calm way he pulled out his phone and started recording. For the record, he said clearly, Marcus Delacoro came to this building of his own volition, against medical advice, to harass my girlfriend. He became verbally abusive and threatening. What happens next is entirely of his own making. The ambulance arrived within minutes, summoned by building security. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and surrounded Marcus, checking his vitals, asking questions. He played his part perfectly, the suffering patient, the man pushed too far by circumstances beyond his control. He even managed to look at Maya with wounded betrayal as they loaded him onto the stretcher. This isn't over, he mouthed at her, making sure only she could see. I'll never let you go. The words should have terrified her. A week ago they would have. But standing there in the lobby with Alexander beside her, with security surrounding them, with the weight of power and resources finally on her side, Maya felt something different. Not fear, resolve. Because Marcus was right about one thing. This wasn't over. But it wouldn't end the way he thought it would. It wouldn't end with her broken and returned to him. It would end with her free, truly free for the first time in years. The paramedics wheeled Marcus out through the lobby doors, and the moment they were gone, Maya felt her knees start to buckle. Alexander caught her, his arms strong and steady, and guided her to a bench against the wall. Breathe, he said quietly. You did so well. You were incredible. Maya laughed shakily. I was terrified, she admitted. Thought I'd freeze up, that I'd fall back into old patterns, but I didn't. I actually stood up to him. You did more than stand up to him, Alexander said. You faced down your nightmare and you didn't flinch. That took courage, Maya, real courage. She looked up at him, this man who had become her unlikely protector, and felt tears streaming down her face. She wasn't even sure if they were tears of fear or relief or exhaustion or some combination of all three. Thank you, she whispered, for being there, for backing me up, for making me feel strong enough to do that. Alexander's expression softened, and he reached up to gently wipe away her tears. You were always strong enough, he said. You just needed someone to remind you. They sat there for a while, letting the adrenaline drain away, watching the lobby return to its normal, quiet efficiency. The security guards resumed their posts. The concierge went back to his desk, and life continued as if nothing world-shattering had just occurred. But everything had changed. Maya had faced Marcus directly, had spoken her truth, and had survived. More than survived. She'd won, at least this round, because Marcus was right. This wasn't over. The man was wounded and cornered, and those were the most dangerous kind. He had the senator's resources behind him, and he had nothing left to lose. The real war was just beginning. But as Maya sat there with Alexander's solid presence beside her, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone fighting with her, not for her. Someone who saw her as an equal partner in this battle, not a victim to be rescued, and that made all the difference. Whatever came next, whatever Marcus and Senator Whitmore threw at them, they would face it together. And Maya was finally ready to stop running and start fighting back. The counterattack came within 48 hours, and it came from an angle Maya hadn't anticipated. She was sitting in Alexander's home office, helping him review the documentation for the restraining order hearing, when his phone rang. It was his lawyer, Genevieve Adler. And from the tight expression on Alexander's face as he listened, the news wasn't good. When he hung up, he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. Senator Whitmore has filed a complaint with the medical board, he said finally. She's claiming that Marcus's heart attack was triggered by extreme emotional distress caused by seeing his mentally unstable ex-wife with a new partner. She's arguing that you're a danger to his health and well-being. and she wants a psychological evaluation mandated before the restraining order hearing can proceed. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. A psychological evaluation. It was brilliant and vicious. Exactly the kind of move she should have expected from someone like Patricia Whitmore. If Maya refused, it would look like she had something to hide. If she agreed, she'd be subjected to interrogation by a psychiatrist who would be looking for any sign of instability, any crack they could exploit to paint her as unreliable or delusional. They're trying to flip the narrative, Alexander continued, his jaw tight with anger. Make Marcus the victim and you the aggressor. If they can establish that you're emotionally unstable, they can argue that your abuse allegations are fabrications, delusions of a disturbed mind. Everything we have documented becomes suspect. Can they do that? Maya asked, her voice small. Can they force me to undergo evaluation? Alexander leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Legally, it's complicated. They're not going through criminal channels. They're using medical and civil avenues. The medical board complaint won't go anywhere. It's pure harassment. But they've also filed a motion in civil court requesting the evaluation as a condition for proceeding with any protective orders. A judge could grant it, especially if they argue it's relevant to determining credibility. Maya felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, of Marcus's web tightening around her. This was what he did, how he operated. He turned your own actions against you, made you question your sanity, forced you into defensive positions where any move you made could be used as evidence of instability. I'll do it, she said quietly. The evaluation. I have nothing to hide. Alexander looked at her sharply. Maya, you don't have to. We can fight this motion, tie it up in court for months. You don't have to submit to their psychological game. But I do, Maya insisted, her resolve hardening. Because if I don't, they win by default. They get to tell everyone I refused because I knew what the evaluation would reveal. At least this way I control the narrative. I sit down with their psychiatrist. I tell the truth, and I let the evidence speak for itself. Alexander studied her for a long moment, and Maya saw respect dawning in his eyes. You're sure about this? He asked. Once we agree to the evaluation, we can't take it back. If their psychiatrist is biased, if they've been bought or pressured by the senator, the report could be damaging regardless of the truth. Then we make sure the evaluation is fair, Maya said. We demand a neutral evaluator, someone with no ties to either side. And we have our own expert there, someone who can verify the process was conducted properly. Can we do that? Alexander's expression shifted from concern to calculation, his strategic mind already working through the possibility. We can certainly try, he said. And we have leverage. If they refuse a neutral evaluator, it suggests they're not interested in the truth, only in a predetermined outcome. That plays poorly in court. He picked up his phone and called Genevieve Adler back. I need you to draft a response to the Whitmore motion, he said without preamble. We'll agree to the psychological evaluation on the following conditions. 1. The evaluator must be mutually agreed upon by both parties from a list of board-certified psychiatrists with no prior connection to either family. 2. The evaluation must be recorded in its entirety. 3. We reserve the right to have our own expert review the methodology and conclusions. And 4. Any evaluation of Miss Chun must be accompanied by an evaluation of Marcus Delacroix, since his mental state is equally relevant to the protective order proceedings. Maya heard Genevieve's surprised laugh through the phone speaker. That last one is going to make them furious, she said. Good, Alexander replied. Let them be furious. If they want to question Maya's sanity, they should be prepared to have Marcus well. Let's see how comfortable the senator is with a psychiatrist documenting her future son-in-law's history of control, manipulation, and he hung up and turned back to Maya. This is going to be difficult, he said. They're going to ask invasive questions, push you to talk about painful memories, try to find inconsistencies in your story. You need to be prepared for that. I am prepared, Maya said, and she meant it. I've been in therapy on and off since I left Marcus. I've done the work to understand what happened to me, to recognize the patterns of abuse and control. I'm not the broken woman I was 3 years ago. I know my own mind. Over the next week, Maya and Alexander prepared for the evaluation with the intensity of lawyers prepping for trial. They reviewed every incident from her marriage, documenting dates and details, cross-referencing them with the evidence they'd already gathered. They practiced answering difficult questions, with Alexander playing the role of hostile examiner, pushing her buttons, trying to make her defensive or emotional. It was exhausting and often painful, but Maya found herself growing stronger through the process, more confident in her own narrative. The evaluator they finally agreed upon was Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation to Maya, a forensic psychiatrist with an impeccable reputation and a specialty in domestic violence cases. She had testified in dozens of high-profile trials and was known for her rigorous objectivity and unwillingness to be influenced by either side's agenda. The Whitmore legal team had tried to reject her, arguing her specialization created bias toward abuse victims. But Alexander's lawyers had countered that her expertise was precisely what made her qualified to evaluate claims of domestic abuse. The judge had agreed. The evaluation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in a neutral office space, a conference room in a downtown building that neither side had any connection to. Maya arrived with Alexander and Genevieve Adler, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Dr. Chun was a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes but a professional demeanor that suggested she suffered no fools. The evaluation took 4 hours. Dr. Chun asked about Maya's childhood, her education, her relationship history before Marcus. She asked detailed questions about the marriage, about specific incidents, about how Maya had felt during and after them. She administered several standardized psychological tests, had Maya describe her current mental state, her goals, her fears. Through it all, Maya told the truth. She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She didn't try to make herself look better or Marcus look worse than reality dictated. She simply recounted what had happened, how it had affected her, and how she'd worked to rebuild her life afterward. When Dr. Chun asked about her relationship with Alexander, Maya was honest about that too. She explained how they'd met, why she'd asked for his help, and how their arrangement had evolved. She didn't try to pretend it was a traditional romance, but she also made clear that it was genuine, that Alexander had shown her what it meant to be with someone who respected her autonomy and supported her choices. Dr. Chun's expression gave nothing away, but she took copious notes. At the end of the 4 hours, Maya was exhausted but felt oddly cleansed, like she'd finally been given space to tell her whole story without interruption or judgment. The doctor would submit her report within a week. In the meantime, Marcus underwent his own evaluation with Dr. Chun, though Maya wasn't privy to tales. She could only imagine how that had gone, Marcus turning on his charm, playing the wounded victim, trying to manipulate even the evaluation process itself. The waiting was torture. Maya threw herself into building a new routine in Alexander's penthouse, trying to create some semblance of normalcy amid the chaos. She cooked meals, discovering that Alexander's state-of-the-art kitchen was a joy to work in. She researched online college program, thinking about finally finishing the degree she'd abandoned when she married Marcus. She video called with the few friends she'd managed to maintain contact with, carefully explaining her new situation without revealing too much. And she spent time with Alexander. Real time, not just strategic planning sessions or legal prep. They had breakfast together every morning, sitting at his kitchen island with coffee and conversation. They watched movies in his home theater, argued about books from his extensive library, and slowly began to know each other as people rather than just partners in a shared crisis. Maya learned that Alexander had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he relaxed, that he was a terrible cook who had survived mostly on takeout before she arrived, and that he had a deep love for classical music that he was almost embarrassed about, as if it didn't fit his corporate image. He learned that Maya had dreamed of being a photographer before Marcus convinced her it was an impractical waste of time, that she could quote entire passages from her favorite novels, and that she sang while she cooked, unconscious melodies that filled the penthouse with unexpected warmth. They were learning each other, and somewhere in that learning, the pretense of their relationship began to feel less like pretense and more like possibility. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the confrontation in the lobby, they were sitting on the sofa together, Maya curled into the corner with a book and Alexander working on his laptop. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable, and Maya realized with a start that she was happy, not just safe or protected, but genuinely content. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "Alexander," she said softly, and he looked up from his screen. "Thank you," she continued, "not just for everything you've done, all the practical help, but for this, for letting me just exist here without pressure or expectations, for giving me space to remember who I am." Alexander closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "You don't need to thank me for that," he said. "Honestly, Maya, you've done more for me than I've done for you." She laughed softly. "I find that hard to believe. I mean, literally safe. I've, cooked some meals and reorganized your kitchen. You've reminded me what it's like to have someone in my space who isn't trying to take something from me," Alexander said quietly. "For years, every relationship I've had, personal or professional, has been transactional. Everyone wants something, leverage or access or money or influence, but you just want to be safe and free. It's refreshingly honest. And having you here has made this place feel less like a showroom and more like a home." The confession was vulnerable in a way Maya had never heard from it. She set down her book and moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "We make a good team," she said softly. "We do," Alexander agreed, and there was something in his eyes, something warm and real that made Maya's breath catch. They were sitting very close now, close enough that Maya could see the flecks of gold in Alexander's dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air between them felt charged, full of possibility and unspoken questions. For a moment, Maya thought he might kiss her, and she realized with surprise that she wanted him to, not because of their arrangement or their fake relationship, but because somewhere in the chaos and fear and strategic planning, she'd started to genuinely care about this man. But before either of them could make a move, Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming email. He glanced at it, and his expression changed instantly from soft to serious. "It was Dr. Chun's report," he said. Maya's heart jumped into her throat. "Already?" she asked. She said a week. Alexander was already opening the file, his eyes scanning rapidly. His expression was unreadable, and Maya felt panic rising in her chest. "What does it say?" she demanded. "Is it bad? Tell me." Alexander looked up at her, and slowly a smile spread across his face. "Perfect," he said. "Dr. Chun's evaluation concluded that you show no signs of mental instability, no indication of delusional thinking or fabricated memories. Your account of the abuse is consistent, detailed, and corroborated by documented evidence." She's clapping classified you as a survivor of severe domestic abuse with appropriate trauma responses, and she's recommending that the restraining order be granted immediately. And Marcus? Maya asked breathlessly. What did she say about Marcus? Alexander's smile turned sharp. She diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. She documented his manipulation tactics during the evaluation, noted his inability to take responsibility for his action, and concluded that he poses a continued threat to your safety. It's a complete vindication, Maya. Everything you've said, everything we've documented, it's all been validated by an independent expert. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and validation and triumph, after 3 years of being told she was crazy, of questioning her own memories and perceptions, of wondering if maybe Marcus had been right and she was the problem. She finally had proof. Professional, clinical, irrefutable proof that she'd been telling the truth all along. The report changed everything. Within 24 hours of its release to both legal teams, the senator's office went silent. No more motions, no more complaints, no more aggressive legal maneuvering. The sudden absence of attacks was almost more unsettling than the constant barrage had been. Alexander's security team reported that the surveillance on his building had ceased. The blue sedan that had been parked outside Maya's old apartment had disappeared, and Marcus himself had gone to ground, leaving the hospital and apparently holing up somewhere private. It felt like the calm before a different kind of storm. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Maya dressed carefully that day, choosing a simple gray suit that Alexander had helped her select. Professional but not ostentatious. She wanted to look like herself, like someone who had survived and rebuilt, not like someone playing dress-up in borrowed confidence. Alexander wore one of his signature dark suits, and together they looked exactly like what they'd become over the past weeks. A united front, partners facing the world together. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building of stone and glass that had witnessed countless dramas play out within its walls. As they climbed the steps, Maya felt Alexander's hand find hers, warm and steady. "You've got this," he murmured. "Just tell your truth." And the courtroom was smaller than Maya had expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic spaces she'd seen on television. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse humanity could devise. Marcus was already there when they entered, sitting at the defendant's table with a lawyer Maya didn't recognize. He'd cleaned up since the lobby confrontation, wearing a crisp suit and looking every inch the respectable businessman. But Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched on the table. He looked at her as she entered, and the hatred in his eyes was pure and undisguised. Beside him sat Senator Whitmore, impeccably dressed and radiating authority. She didn't look at Maya at all, her attention fixed on the judge with the focus of someone used to commanding rooms. The presence of a sitting senator at a restraining order hearing was unusual enough to draw attention, and Maya saw the court reporter's eyes widen slightly. The hearing proceeded with bureaucratic efficiency. Genevieve Adler presented their case, walking through the history of abuse, the documentation from 3 years ago, the recent stalking and surveillance, and finally Dr. Chun's devastating psychological evaluation. She painted a picture of a woman who had escaped a dangerous situation, tried to rebuild her life, and was now being hunted by a man who refused to accept that she was no longer his to control. Marcus's lawyer attempted to counter, arguing that the original restraining order had expired, that Marcus had moved on with his life and was engaged to be married, and that any contact had been coincidental rather than intentional. He portrayed Marcus as the real victim, a man whose health had been compromised by the shock of seeing his ex-wife with another man, a man who was being persecuted by powerful people with unlimited resources. It was a valiant effort, but it crumbled under the weight of evidence. The surveillance logs, the documented visits to Maya's apartment building, the threatening behavior in Alexander's lobby, all of it painted a picture that no amount of legal spin could erase. And then Dr. Chun's report was entered into evidence, and Maya watched Marcus's lawyer visibly deflate as he read it. The judge read through everything in silence, her expression unchanging. When she finally looked up, her gaze swept across both sides of the courtroom. "I've reviewed the evidence presented," she said, her voice carrying authority that silenced even the ambient noise of the building. "The documentation is extensive and compelling. Miss Chun has demonstrated a clear pattern of abuse during her marriage to Mira Delacroix, and more concerning, a pattern of continued harassment and stalking after the dissolution of that marriage. The expired restraining order does not negate Mr. Delacroix's ongoing behavior." She turned her attention to Marcus, and her expression hardened. "Mr. Delacroix, I find your behavior troubling. The psychological evaluation indicates that you have not addressed the issues that led to the dissolution of your marriage, and your recent actions demonstrate a concerning inability to accept boundaries. I am granting Miss Chun's request for a restraining order. You are to have no contact with her, direct or indirect. You are not to come within 500 feet of her residence or place of employment employment, or any location where you have reason to believe she might be present. This order will remain in effect for 5 years, and any violation will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "Can't do this. I have rights. I'm not some criminal. You're being manipulated by him, by Grayson. He's the one who should be investigated. He's using his money to buy this outcome." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the small courtroom. "Mere Delacour, sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt. This is a court of law, not a forum for your grievances." Marcus's lawyer grabbed his arm, pulling him back into his seat, whispering urgently in his ear. But the damage was done. The outburst had only confirmed everything in Dr. Chun's report. The inability to control his emotions, the tendency to blame others, the refusal to accept responsibility. Senator Whitmore sat rigid beside him, her face a mask of controlled fury. And Maya realized with a shock that the senator's anger wasn't directed at the judge or Alexander. It was directed at Marcus himself. He'd just destroyed whatever political capital she'd invested in defending him. The hearing concluded shortly after. The order officially entered into the record. As they stood to leave, Maya caught Senator Whitmore leaning close to Marcus, her words inaudible but her body language speaking volumes. This was a woman cutting her losses, and Maya suspected that the senator's daughter would be receiving some very direct advice about her impending marriage. Outside the courthouse in the bright afternoon sunshine, Maya felt like she could finally breathe. It was over. Really, truly over. She had a legal document now, official protection, and more than that, she had validation. A judge had looked at the evidence and declared that Maya had been telling the truth, that Marcus was dangerous, that she deserved to be protected. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked, his arm around her shoulders as they descended the courthouse steps. "Free," Maya said, and laughed at the simple truth of it. "For the first time in 6 years, I actually feel free." They celebrated quietly that evening, just the two of them in the penthouse. Alexander opened a bottle of champagne, expensive and perfectly chilled, and they toasted to new beginning. They ordered takeout from Maya's favorite Thai restaurant, the kind of place Alexander would never normally eat from, and sprawled on his pristine sofa eating pad thai straight from the containers. It was gloriously normal and wonderfully mundane, and Maya loved every second of it. As the evening wore on and the champagne mellowed into comfortable warmth, Maya found herself studying Alexander again. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, and looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. There was something she needed to say, something she'd been building toward all evening. "Alexander," she began, and he turned to her with that focused attention he had, making her feel like the only person in the world. "I know we started this as an arrangement, as protection, but somewhere along the way, it became something else for me. You became something else." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I care about you, not because you saved me, or because you have resources or any of those practical reasons. I care about you because you're kind and thoughtful and you make me laugh, because you see me as a person, not a project or a possession. And I know our circumstances have been unusual, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real." Alexander set down his glass, his expression serious. "Maya," he said slowly, "I need to be honest with you. When I first helped you, it was about Rebecca, about correcting my own past failures. But you're right. Somewhere along the way it became about you, about us. You've changed something in me, broken down walls I didn't even realize I'd built." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "I care about you too, more than I probably should given how quickly this has all happened. But I also want to make sure we're doing this for the right reason, that we're not confusing gratitude and proximity for something deeper." Maya felt her heart clenched, afraid of what he might say next. But then Alexander smiled, and it was that genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "So here's what I think we should do," he continued. "Let's take time, real time. You're safe now. The restraining order is in place. Marcus can't touch you. There's no crisis forcing us together. Let's date properly. Get to know each other without the pressure of survival hanging over us. And if what we feel is real, if it's not just trauma bonding or gratitude or convenience, then we'll know. And if it turns out we're better as friends, we'll know that too." It was so rational, so measured, so perfectly Alexander that Maya couldn't help but laugh. "You want to date me," she said, "after I've been living in your house for weeks, after we've survived a legal battle together? You want to take me on dates?" "I want to do this right," Alexander said simply. "You deserve that. You deserve courtship and romance and all the normal things that Marcus stole from you. Let me give you that." Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but these were happy tears, overwhelmed tears. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's do it right. Take me on a date, Alexander Grayson. Show me what normal looks like." He did exactly that. Over the following weeks, Alexander courted Maya with old-fashioned dedication. He took her to art galleries and explained why certain pieces moved him. They went to concerts where they sat in perfect acoustics and let music wash over them. They walked through parks at sunset, had coffee in tiny cafes that Alexander had never noticed despite walking past them for years, and talked about everything from philosophy to their favorite childhood memory. Maya showed Alexander her photography tentatively at first, expecting criticism or dismissal. Instead, he insisted on having several pieces professionally framed and hung them in his office. telling his colleagues that his girlfriend was a talented artist. The word girlfriend, once a necessary fiction, became simply truth. They moved slowly physically, rebuilding Maya's comfort with intimacy at a pace that felt safe. A held hand here, a gentle kiss there, gradually increasing as Maya's trust deepened. Alexander never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything. It was revelatory, discovering that desire could exist without pressure, that romance could happen without manipulation, and through it all, Marcus remained blessedly absent. The restraining order had teeth, and apparently, even Senator Whitmore's influence had limits when faced with a legal document and the threat of Alexander's resources. Maya heard through the grapevine that the engagement had been called off, that Vanessa Whitmore had quietly removed herself from the situation, and that Marcus had left the city entirely. Whether he'd gone willingly or had been encouraged to relocate by the senator's people was unclear, but the result was the same. Gone. 3 months after the hearing, Maya made a decision. She was sitting in the guest room, the space that had become hers over the months of living in Alexander's penthouse, when she realized something profound. She was happy, genuinely, authentically happy in a way she'd never been, not even before Marcus. She'd found meaningful work doing freelance photography. She'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones. She'd started therapy again, working through layers of trauma she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. And she'd fallen in love with a man who treated her like an equal, who supported her dream, who made her laugh and challenged her thinking, never ever tried to control her. She found Alexander in his office, reviewing contracts with his usual intense focus. When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, he smiled, that warm smile that was reserved just for her. "Hey," he said, "what's up?" "I love you," Maya said simply. No preamble, no build-up, just the truth. "I'm in love with you, Alexander Grayson, and I needed you to know." Alexander stood, closing the distance between them in a few quick strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes searching hers. "I love you too," he said. "I have for weeks. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you." "This is the right moment," Maya said, and then she kissed him, putting everything she felt into it. All the gratitude and affection and desire and hope for the future. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Move in with me," he said. "Really move in? Not in the guest room as part of an arrangement, but in my room, in my life, as my partner. What do you say?" Maya smiled. "I say, yes." 6 months later, Maya stood in the gleaming kitchen of the penthouse that had become her home, preparing dinner for a celebration. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, chopping vegetables for the salad while chicken roasted in the oven. The space that had once intimidated her with its pristine perfection now bore the marks of her presence. Cookbooks lined one counter, her favorite coffee mug sat by the machine, and photographs she'd taken decorated the walls alongside Alexander's expensive art collection. The transformation wasn't just in the apartment, it was in her. Maya caught her reflection in the window as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The woman looking back at her was different from the terrified waitress who had grabbed a stranger's arm in desperate hope 6 months ago. This woman stood straight, her shoulders back, her expression confident. She'd gained weight, the healthy kind that came from eating regular meals without anxiety knotting her stomach. Her hair was longer, styled in a way that pleased her rather than someone else. But the biggest change was in her eyes. There was light there now. Hope and happiness where fear had once lived. The front door opened and Alexander walked in, loosening his tie as he always did, the familiar gesture that meant the workday was officially over. His face lit up when he saw her, the same way it did every time, and Maya felt her heart do that little flutter that still surprised her with its intensity. "Something smells amazing," he said, crossing to her and pulling her into a kiss that tasted like coming home. "What are we celebrating?" "Everything," Maya said, leaning into his embrace. "Life, love, freedom. Also, I have news." She pulled back just enough to see his face, watching as curiosity and something like concern flickered across his features. "Good news," she assured him quickly. "Great news, actually. I got accepted to the photography program at the university. Full scholarship." Alexander's whoop of joy was so uncharacteristic, so purely delighted, that Maya burst out laughing. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his hands cupped her face and his eyes were bright with pride. "I'm so proud of you," he said fiercely. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve every bit of it." "It's because of you," Maya said, her own eyes filling with tears. "You gave me the space to remember who I was, who I wanted to be. You believed I could do this before I believed it myself. We gave each other that," Alexander corrected gently. "You've changed my life just as much as I've changed yours, Maya. This penthouse was just a place I slept before you. Now it's a home. I was just going through motions, building empires without understanding why. You gave me purpose beyond profit margins and market shares." They were interrupted by the doorbell, a sound that would have sent Maya into a panic spiral 6 months ago, but now just meant their dinner guests were arriving. Alexander answered the door while Maya plated appetizers, and soon the penthouse filled with voices and laughter. Genevieve Adler arrived first, her professional severity softened by the glass of wine Alexander pressed into her hand. Webb, Alexander's head of security, came next with his partner, a warm woman who worked as a teacher. And then came the guest of honor, the reason for tonight's specific celebration. Rebecca Pierce, Alexander's sister, stepped into the penthouse with the cautious hope of someone testing whether a space was safe. She was beautiful, Maya saw, with Alexander's same dark hair and intelligent eyes. But There was a fragility to her that spoke of battles fought and barely won. Maya had heard so much about Rebecca over the months, had understood that Alexander's fierce protection of her was what had driven him to help a desperate stranger in a restaurant, but they'd never met until tonight. Rebecca had been living across the country, building her new life far from the memories of her own abusive marriage. She'd only recently felt strong enough to visit. "Maya," Rebecca said softly, and there was a wealth of emotion in just that one word. "Alexander has told me so much about you." Maya crossed the room and took Rebecca's hands, feeling the slight tremble in them, recognizing the courage it took for this woman to be here. "And he's told me about you," Maya said gently. "I'm so honored to finally meet you. Thank you for coming." Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. They were both survivors, both warriors who had fought their way out of darkness. The evening that followed was full of warmth and genuine connection. They ate Maya's cooking, which everyone praised with what seemed like real enthusiasm rather than politeness. They talked about Rebecca's work at a nonprofit that helped domestic violence survivors, about Maya's upcoming photography program, about Alexander's latest business venture that focused on funding women-owned startups. The conversation was light but meaningful, touching on serious topics without dwelling in darkness. This was what healing looked like, Maya realized. Not forgetting the past, but not being defined by it either. At one point, Rebecca pulled Maya aside while the others were debating the merits of various desserts. "I need to thank you," Rebecca said quietly. "For what?" Maya asked, genuinely confused. "For saving my brother," Rebecca replied. "He was so closed off before you, so locked in his guilt about not protecting me better. I kept telling him it wasn't his fault, that he'd done everything he could, but he couldn't forgive himself. Then you came along and he got a second chance. He got to be the person he wished he'd been for me. And in saving you, he saved himself." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. "We saved each other," she said, echoing Alexander's words from earlier. "That's what love does, I think. It doesn't rescue, it partners. It doesn't fix, it supports. We're both better together than we were alone." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "My brother's lucky to have found you," she said. "And I'm lucky to have you as family now. Because that's what you are, Maya. Family." The word settled into Maya's heart like a blessing. She'd lost so much when she married Marcus, had been cut off from her own family and friends, but now she was building something new, something chosen rather than inherited. A family bound not by blood, but by understanding, by shared experience, by genuine love and respect. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Rebecca hugged Maya tightly. "Call me if you ever need anything," she whispered. "And I mean anything. We survivors, we stick together." After everyone had gone, Maya and Alexander stood together at the window, looking out over the city lights. The same city where 6 months ago Maya had been running scared, where Marcus had found her, where everything had changed. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alexander asked quietly. "At the restaurant when you grabbed my arm. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said no, if I'd walked away?" Maya leaned into him, his arm coming around her shoulders automatically. "All the time," she admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how desperate. I was asking a stranger to save me, and I had no reason to believe he would, but you did. You said yes when you had every reason to say no, and that changed everything." Alexander turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I said yes because I saw you," he said. "Really saw you. Not a waitress or a problem or a damsel in distress, but a warrior who was fighting with every weapon she had. You saved yourself, Maya. I just provided some backup." They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, and Maya thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fear and the fighting, the courtroom battles and the slow building of trust, the way trauma could be transformed into strength, how darkness could give way to light if you just kept moving forward. Her phone buzzed with a text, and she glanced at it out of habit, then froze. The message was from an unknown number, just 3 words. "I'm watching you." Maya's first instinct was panic, the old fear rising up to choke her. But then Alexander's hand tightened on her shoulder and she took a breath, forcing herself to think rationally. She showed him the text. "Marcus," she said. "It has to be. He's violated the restraining order." Alexander's expression hardened, but there was something calculating in it rather than worried. "He's made a mistake," he said. "A prosecutable mistake." He pulled out his own phone and within minutes was on a call with Webb, with his lawyers, with the police. The machinery of protection sprang into action, not with panic, but with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, they had traced the number to a burner phone purchased at a convenience store in a city 300 miles away. There was security camera footage of the purchase, and while the person buying it had tried to hide their face, the footage combined with the text itself was enough for the police to take action. A warrant was issued for Marcus's arrest for violating the restraining order. By the next morning, he was in custody. His bail set high enough that even with his resources, he'd have difficulty making it. And this time, there was no senator riding to his rescue. According to Alexander's sources, Patricia Whitmore had completely severed ties with Marcus after the engagement was broken. Her daughter had apparently found evidence of his infidelities and controlling behavior, and the senator had cut her losses. Marcus was truly alone now, facing the consequences of his actions without the shield of money or power or political connections. Maya testified at his violation hearing, her voice steady as she described the pattern of harassment, the way Marcus had continued to try to control her even after the restraining order. The judge looked at Marcus with undisguised disgust. and sentenced him to 6 months in jail, with the remainder of the 5-year restraining order to be enforced with electronic monitoring upon his release. He would wear an ankle monitor that would alert authorities if he came anywhere near Maya. As Marcus was led away, he turned back one last time, his eyes finding Maya in the courtroom. She expected to see hatred or rage or even the manipulative false remorse he was so good at. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like defeat, a broken man finally understanding that he'd lost, that no amount of manipulation or threats or legal maneuvering would return him to a position of power over her. Maya felt nothing, not satisfaction or triumph or even relief, just a calm, settled certainty that this chapter of her life was finally completely closed. That evening, back in the safety of the penthouse, Maya stood at the window again, but this time she was alone with her thoughts. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Terrified and trapped, convinced that her life would always be defined by what Marcus had done to her. She thought about the desperate gamble she'd taken, grabbing a stranger's arm and begging for protection. And she thought about who she'd become, not because of what had happened to her, but because of what she'd chosen to do in response. She'd chosen to trust when trust felt impossible. She'd chosen to fight when fighting felt futile. She'd chosen to love again when love felt like the most dangerous gamble of all. And all those choices had led her here, to this moment, to this life. Alexander found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How a single moment can change everything," Maya said. "How one choice, one act of courage or kindness or hope can alter the entire trajectory of a life. If I hadn't grabbed your arm that night, if you hadn't said yes, where would I be now? But you did and I did," Alexander said simply. "And here we are." "Here we are," Maya echoed. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her partner, her lover, her home. "I want to take my own photo series," she said suddenly. "Document this journey from where I was to where I am now. Not just my story, but stories like mine. Women who survived, who rebuilt, who found their way back to themselves. I want to show the world what survival looks like, what strength looks like." Alexander smiled, that full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "That's beautiful," he said, "and I know exactly the right gallery to showcase it. We'll call it Phoenix Rising." Maya laughed, the sound free and full of joy. "Perfect," she said, "because that's exactly what we've done. We've risen from the ashes of who we used to be and become something new, something better, something real." They stood there together as the city lights came on below them. Two people who had found each other in the midst of crisis and chosen to build something lasting from it. The desperate waitress and the powerful CEO, brought together by chance and kept together by choice. Their story had started with fear and desperation, with a grabbed arm and a whispered plea, but it had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. A partnership built on mutual respect, a love born from seeing and being seen, a future full of possibility. Maya Chun had walked into a restaurant 6 months ago, barely surviving, running from a nightmare that seemed endless. She'd grabbed onto hope in the form of a stranger's arm, and that stranger had said yes. That single yes had cascaded into 1,000 other yeses. Yes to protection, yes to partnership, yes to possibility, yes to healing, yes to love, yes to a future that was no longer defined by fear. And now, standing in the home she'd built with Alexander, about to start a university program that would fulfill a dream she'd thought long dead, surrounded by people who loved her for exactly who she was, Maya finally understood something profound. Marcus had tried to destroy her, to break her down until she believed she was nothing without him, but he'd failed. Because she'd never been nothing. She'd been everything she needed to be all along. She just needed time and space and someone who believed in her to remember it. The story of the desperate waitress who grabbed a CEO's arm didn't end with a rescue. It ended with a woman who saved herself, who built a life worth living, who learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and acting anyway. It was about falling down and getting back up. It was about asking for help when you needed it and offering help when you could give it. It was about transforming pain into purpose and fear into fierce, beautiful determination. And as Maya looked around at the life she'd built, at the man who loved her, at the future stretching out before her full of possibility and promise, she made herself a final promise. She would never again let anyone make her feel small. She would never again question her own worth. She would never again apologize for taking up space or having opinions or choosing herself. She had grabbed onto hope once, desperately in a moment of terror, and hope had held on right back. That was the real fairy tale, she thought. Not being rescued, but finding the courage to rescue yourself and discovering that you didn't have to do it alone. That somewhere out there were people waiting to stand with you, to fight beside you, to remind you of your own strength when you forgot it. Maya Chun had started as a desperate waitress, but she'd become so much more. A survivor, a photographer, a student, a lover, a friend, a warrior. Someone who had stared into darkness and chosen light, someone who had been broken and had healed stronger, someone who had been told she was nothing and had proven herself to be everything. And this beautiful, hard-won, fully lived life, this was just the beginning.